Before my brother's wedding, my parents handed me 5 rules and said that if I broke even one of them, I would never be allowed to attend. They slid the list across the dining table as though it were a peace treaty. My mother's fingers trembled. My father refused to meet my eyes. Rule 1. Don't speak to the bride about the past. Rule 2. Don't tell anyone why you left home. Rule 3. Don't drink. Rule 4. Don't make a scene. Rule 5. Smile for the family photographs. My brother sat beside them in perfect silence, staring at the polished wood instead of at me. That silence hurt more than the rules. The room smelled of fresh coffee and lemon polish, but all I could taste was the bitterness settling in my throat. I realized then that I wasn't being invited to celebrate. I was being invited to perform, to become the obedient daughter they could display before relatives who believed. Our family had always been happy. I folded the paper once, slipped it into my pocket, smiled exactly the way they expected, and said, "Of course." That smile convinced everyone. 3 hours later, I booked a beachfront villa in Malibu for the exact weekend of the ceremony. I wasn't planning to argue. I wasn't planning to expose anyone in person, and I certainly wasn't planning to beg for a seat at a wedding where my existence came with conditions. Instead, I arranged for one final gift to arrive at the reception. When my brother opened the carefully wrapped box in front of hundreds of applauding guests, the music stopped. His face drained of color. Then he let out a scream so raw that every conversation in the ballroom died instantly. That was the first time my family understood. That silence can be the sharpest form of revenge. People often mistake silence for weakness, and my family made that mistake for years. I was the child who noticed everything but interrupted nothing. While everyone celebrated Daniel's victories, I quietly handled the details that made those celebrations possible, from organizing family events to smoothing over arguments before they became public embarrassments. By the end of every gathering, people thanked him for a perfect day without realizing whose work they had enjoyed. My parents called me independent, but it was simply their kinder word for forgotten. They rarely asked how I was unless the answer could be shared proudly with relatives. If I succeeded, it was expected. If Daniel succeeded, it became family history. He wasn't cruel in obvious ways. That would have been easier to confront. Instead, he accepted every advantage without question. He borrowed my ideas, introduced them as his own, and smiled while people applauded him. When I stayed quiet, everyone assumed I agreed. Eventually, even he believed the spotlight belonged to him by birth. The hardest part wasn't losing recognition. It was watching my own memories rewritten while I stood in the same room. Stories changed with each holiday until I became a background character in moments I had lived through. If I corrected anyone, my parents laughed and told me I was too sensitive. So I stopped correcting them. I started listening. People reveal their true character when they think no one is paying attention. Over the years, I collected broken promises, whispered conversations, forgotten emails, and careless admissions, not because I planned revenge, but because I needed proof that I wasn't imagining the pattern. By the time Daniel announced his wedding, I no longer wanted an apology or a place at the family table. I wanted something far quieter. I wanted the truth to arrive without me saying a single word. The weeks before the wedding felt less like a family celebration and more like a carefully rehearsed performance, where everyone already knew their lines except me. Every phone call carried another polite instruction disguised as concern. My mother reminded me which colors I shouldn't wear because they might draw attention, my father suggested. I arrive after the ceremony so there would be less confusion during family photographs. Each request was delivered in a gentle voice, followed by a long pause that implied refusal wasn't really an option. Daniel never gave orders himself. He had perfected something far more effective. He let everyone else do it for him. Whenever we crossed paths, he offered the same practiced smile, the kind that never reached his eyes. "I'm just trying to keep the day stress-free," he would say, lightly tapping my shoulder before walking away. The words sounded reasonable. The message beneath them was unmistakable. You are the stress. Even the wedding planner seemed to know my role. She checked guest lists twice whenever I approached, then apologized with an embarrassed smile that revealed she'd been warned about me long before we'd met. Relatives began calling with oddly similar advice. Don't bring up old family stories. Just let the past stay buried. This day is about Daniel. No one asked what version of the past they were protecting. At the rehearsal dinner, I watched conversations stop for half a second whenever I entered a room. Eyes met, then drifted away. Someone would quickly change the subject, and laughter resumed a heartbeat later, just polished enough to pretend nothing had happened. They thought exclusion had to be loud to leave a mark. They never noticed that every careful glance, every measured silence, every rehearsed smile confirmed exactly what I had suspected all along. By then, my suitcase for Malibu was already packed. So was the gift. The turning point came 2 nights before the wedding, though no one else in the room realized it. My parents invited me over to clear the air. The dining table was set as neatly as it had been when they handed me the 5 rules, as if matching plates and folded napkins could disguise years of unequal treatment. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe they wanted honesty instead of obedience. My father folded his hands and spoke first. If you truly love your brother, you'll let the past stay where it belongs. Not if the past is untrue. Not if we were wrong. Just leave it alone. Then my mother reached into a drawer and quietly placed a simple envelope in front of me. Inside was a check, far more money than they'd ever offered me before. It isn't a payment, she said softly. Think of it as a fresh start. I looked from the check to their faces and understood exactly what they were buying. Not my forgiveness, my silence. I slid the envelope back across the table without saying a word. Neither of them tried to stop me as I stood. I think they mistook my calm for surrender. Outside, the evening air felt strangely light. The decision I'd been wrestling with for years was suddenly effortless. I wasn't going to interrupt the ceremony. I wasn't going to expose anyone with speeches or accusations. The truth didn't need my voice anymore. Everything I needed had already been documented, copied, and sealed, inside one carefully wrapped wedding gift that would be opened exactly as planned. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting to my family's choices. They were about to react to mine. I never believed revenge should depend on luck. If it could fall apart because someone raised their voice or called security, it wasn't a plan, it was an impulse. Years earlier, I'd built a career in corporate compliance, where every claim had to be supported by documents, timestamps and records that could withstand scrutiny. Opinions meant nothing. Evidence meant everything. That habit followed me into every corner of my life. Instead of confronting anyone, I spent one quiet evening reviewing what I already had. Emails saved over the years, text messages that contradicted family stories, bank records connected to promises my parents insisted had never existed, voice messages no one thought were important enough to delete. Each file was authentic, dated, and impossible to dismiss as a misunderstanding. I organized everything into a simple digital archive with a clear timeline. No dramatic captions, no emotional commentary. Every document spoke for itself. The wedding gift was intentionally ordinary, a handcrafted wooden memory box engraved with Daniel and his bride's initials. Inside, beneath a layer of tissue paper, rested a small photo album from our childhood. It was the kind of sentimental gift guests expected. Tucked into the final page was a sealed envelope addressed only to Daniel. Inside were a flash drive, a single password, and one handwritten sentence. If you're ready to know why I really left home, open the files before you say I do to a life built on half-truths. Then I left for Malibu. No anonymous messages, no public threats, no attempt to control what happened next. I simply placed the truth within reach and trusted that curiosity would do what anger never could. The reception was already underway when the courier delivered the gift. I never watched it happen. I had arranged that on purpose. An hour later, my phone vibrated once. Then again. Then it refused to stop. Missed calls from my mother, from my father, from cousins who had barely spoken to me in years. I let every call pass, Only after the sun began sinking into the ocean did I open a message from Daniel. It contained just 4 words. How long? Did you know? I didn't answer. Later, I learned what had happened from guests who couldn't resist telling the story. Daniel had opened the memory box with a smile, flipping through childhood photographs, while relatives laughed at old hairstyles and faded birthdays. Then he reached the final page. He found the envelope. He read the handwritten note. Curiosity 1. He connected the flash drive to his laptop in a quiet room beside the ballroom. Within minutes, the celebration stopped. The timeline, the messages, the financial records, and years of carefully preserved evidence dismantled the version of our family he'd accepted his entire life. Piece by piece, the silence he had inherited became impossible to defend. When he returned to the reception, his face had lost every trace of confidence. Someone asked if he was all right. Instead of answering, he let out a terrified scream that echoed across the ballroom. It wasn't fear of me. It was the sound of certainty collapsing. I watched another wave fold gently onto the sand outside my balcony and slipped, my phone into my pocket. The ocean didn't care who had been right. Neither did I anymore. The truth had arrived exactly where it belonged, and I never had to raise my voice to deliver it. By the following morning, the story had already fractured into a dozen different versions. Some relatives insisted the wedding had been ruined by an unexpected family dispute. Others whispered that Daniel had discovered something he was never meant to see. For the first time, no one could agree on the convenient version of events, and that uncertainty spoke louder than any accusation I could have made. My parents stopped calling after the second day. Instead, they sent short messages asking to talk privately, not to deny the evidence, not to claim it had been fabricated. They simply wanted the conversation away from the people who had started asking uncomfortable questions. Daniel reached out only once more. His message wasn't angry. It wasn't forgiving either. It said, I spent my whole life believing one story. I don't know who I am without it. I understood that better than he realized. A damaged reputation can recover with time. A broken illusion cannot. Once someone sees the truth for themselves, they can't unknow it, no matter how desperately they wish they could. As for me, nothing dramatic changed overnight. I didn't suddenly gain a perfect family or reclaim the years I'd lost, trying to earn love that always came with conditions. What changed was quieter. I stopped measuring my worth by people committed to misunderstanding me. The silence that once felt like punishment became peace. Looking back, I don't think the gift destroyed my family. It simply removed the last excuse they had for pretending everything was fine. That's why this story matters. Betrayal rarely begins with one spectacular act. More often, it's built from countless small moments when truth is exchanged for comfort. Eventually, someone decides that comfort has become too expensive. That someone was me. People sometimes imagine revenge as a moment of triumph, a slammed door, a shouted confession, a room full of people finally taking your side. Mine looked nothing like that. It looked like waking up to the sound of waves instead of arguments. It looked like deleting unread messages without feeling guilty. It looked like realizing that peace isn't something your family gives you. It's something you choose when you stop asking people to become who they've repeatedly shown they are not. In the months that followed, I heard bits and pieces through mutual relatives. Daniel postponed more than the wedding. He began asking difficult questions. No one in our family had wanted to answer for years. My parents, once so certain that silence could protect them, discovered that silence can also leave people alone with their own conscience. As for me, I didn't spend my future watching theirs. I stayed in Malibu longer than I'd planned, then returned home and accepted a promotion I'd almost turned down because I'd been too busy trying to repair relationships that only one side wanted to save. I rented a small apartment with wide windows, filled it with books, photographs I actually loved, and enough quiet to hear my own thoughts again. The greatest surprise wasn't that my family finally understood what they'd lost. It was that I no longer needed them to. Forgiveness, I learned, doesn't always mean rebuilding a bridge. Sometimes it simply means setting down the weight you've carried for too long and walking forward without looking back. I never celebrated what happened at my brother's wedding. I celebrated what happened afterward. For the first time in my life, I belonged to myself. And in the end, that was the only victory no one could ever take away.